Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Team Perks. We're continuing to share some ideas and have some conversations with you that are designed to help us to kind of build the team culture and encourage us to grow together. I'm hosting our discussion today, and I've got John Cook here with me. We're going to talk about the ideas around vocational ministry.
Thanks for riding in cars with coworkers. I was surprised you were willing to do the video.
Well, when you're told to by your boss, it's not really willing.
Yep. I thought I got out of it, but John caught me in the parking lot, leaving to do real work.
This phrase, real work. What does real work mean to a production team member, Phil?
Hard labor, lifting a lot of things, sweating.
What's your favorite campus to work at?
Probably Crosspoint.
Why? Because it's the biggest?
Stir.
What would you say is a good reason to call in sick to work?
There isn't one.
What do you think about the people on our team that go work off-site?
The closest I've wanted to come is going to like Home Depot maybe, because Starbucks just doesn't quite fit with who I am.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good question for you guys. Starbucks or Tim Hortons?
Tim Hortons.
Depends on the day.
Phil likes Panera.
Sometimes.
Why do you like Panera?
Got good salads.
Phil, who's your favorite staff member?
Probably Kyle.
Would you say that if Kyle wasn't in the car?
Probably.
Okay. Who's your second favorite staff member?
Daryl.
Yeah? Because of Stir?
Sure.
Kyle, who's your favorite staff member?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I kind of probably have to say my family. I have a bunch of them here, so you could pick a Dan or a Cassidy, I guess.
Well, pick a Dan. Which Dan's your favorite? You probably won't. Neither one of those guys will watch this video anyway. So
no, I'm sure they won't. It won't matter. I'm only here because you're making me be.
Same.
Yeah, let's. How does your guys' job differ from a worship leader's job?
I guess the difference is they get to work in air-conditioned offices, and we're usually sweating.
Yep.
That's great. Okay.
First question. So for a lot of people, the idea of vocational ministry, it's either been elevated or sometimes cast in a negative light. How can we have a right understanding of vocational ministry, being members of this team, but then how can we also at times misunderstand it or look at it in an unhealthy way?
Yeah, I dove into this topic a while ago with my staff team, thinking through, a rightly understood priority for that. We don't want to look at vocational ministry as being this elevated, glorified, some sort of special dispensation that God has placed on each of us,
right,
though we're grateful to work in a place like this. And we also don't want to undervalue or kind of depreciate the blessing that it is to work at a church. And so I really started to think through that. What does that look like? What does that mean? What does it mean for everyone on our staff team? We've talked about things related to all of us are ministers in a regard, that we all have an opportunity to be able to serve and minister at this place, and that is focused toward people, caring for our congregation, being missional in our work ethic and in our contribution to the team. And so anyways, I landed in a place of wanting to be very careful that we didn't have anyone thinking, myself included, that vocational ministry was anything other than what it is, right? And so this is what I basically said, that vocational ministry is the blessing that God has put on my life to take care of kind of the financial needs that I have, to release me further into ministry. I want to be very careful to not think of vocational ministry as being elevated above someone that, for instance, is bivocational, right? We got friends, pastors, fellow servants in other ministries who they're volunteer leaders, but they're getting after the work of the ministry. And who would we be to say that for some reason that we get a paycheck changes the conversation or somehow validates my calling above theirs or your calling above theirs? And I want to be careful of that, right? Again, it doesn't doesn't have to mean that we are devaluing that. It is a very significant thing that God has put us on this team. I believe He's done that in His sovereignty, that He's put the right people on this team at the right time for His purposes. But we want to be careful not to elevate that. So I've said a couple things along those lines. One, that vocational ministry doesn't solely validate a calling. I think for those who maybe have wrestled through that, someday when I get hired by the church, then I'll know that I've been called into ministry. And the reality is, this, we've all been called into ministry, right? So I look at vocational ministry as really just this blessing that God has given me and you, that I can put 40 hours worth of work, maybe more like 50 or 60 hours worth of work, into the things that I'm contributing to. But I know this, and I really truly believe this, that if I wasn't getting paid to be here, I would still be here, and I'd still be contributing. I may not be able to do that 40, 50, 60 hours a week, because I would have to pay my mortgage, I'd have to feed my kids, I'd have to do all that. And so it's a blessing that I can fully commit. It also helps me, I think, to reframe my understanding of that contribution, that I'm giving my best here. I'm putting my full attention to this place and to the ministry work that I'm doing here, because God's released me from having to go chase down other income and trying to figure out how to make that all work. And that way, it's a huge blessing.
Right. So in its simplest form, ministry is an expectation of every disciple.
Yeah.
Right. But what vocational ministry enables us to do is it frees up our capacity to give all of our time and energy towards those things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say also that we have to be careful that when we look at elevate kind of vocational ministry as this thing to attain, that somehow that becomes the end-all be-all. I've also talked about how vocational ministry alone doesn't align me to the mission of this place. That's why I love that so many of our staff served here as volunteers first. They were aligned to the calling, aligned to the ministry, sold out for what God was doing here, and then God slowly, or maybe quickly, kind of released that pressure of having to seek other compensation and allowed them to be able to be fully released into vocational ministry here. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So what are some of those blessings or areas to be grateful for in vocational ministry?
Yeah, again, I think it allows me, I'm grateful that I can give my full time and attention to this place. And sometimes even that work-life balance, which I'll talk about some pitfalls in a second, that doesn't really exist in vocational ministry. But that in and of itself is a blessing, That there are some dangers to watch out for in that. But the blessing in my mind is that I have an opportunity now to kind of fully give my time, energy, and talent to this place, and allow to see kind of the results of that play out. It looks different, but there's a blessing in that. It also means that God is allowing me to grow and develop here, that I don't have to go and kind of fill out my resume. I don't have to go and kind of seek other qualifications before I can come and serve in a place like this. But really the blessing of vocational ministry is I get to work that out in a place like this and grow and develop here, which I know we value on this team, which I'm grateful for.
Absolutely. So you and I have both had these types of conversations where we've helped to lead others as they've walked into vocational ministry, maybe from something else. So if we're helping to have those conversations with others, what are some of the expectations that we can help to reset for them when it comes to prayerful consideration of vocational ministry?
Yeah, in recent interviews and conversations, I've used this phrase, which I'm sure I stole from somebody, I just can't remember who, that I'd rather talk someone out of a job than into a job. And I think that's true on any team, but I think it's specifically true here because of the wrong framework that can be used when you think about vocational ministry. I know there are a lot of people who, and this is a great thing. It's a great thing about our team. It's a great thing about our church. They just want to work here. They don't even necessarily take the time to think through, am I called? And by the way, even in that phrase, there's some things tied up in the word calling, that somehow there's this light that bursts through the clouds and God reveals that you've been called. I do believe that there is a calling, but Os Guinness said this best. I love that book, The Call. He says that our calling is first to a person, and that's Jesus, and secondarily to a vocation. So when I talk to people who are considering vocation, who are thinking through, man, I'd love to work here, I think the first question is, well, where are you already working here? Where are you already contributing here? Does this opportunity, does this opening align with your gifting, align with your talent? Are you prepared, even spiritually mature enough to handle the collision of worlds between, okay, this person's now my pastor and my boss and my fellow believer? That's hard to process. These people who I've served in ministry with, who've been my friends, maybe I'm in a small group with them, now they're my coworkers, and we have a disagreement over who's going to accomplish this and how are we going to do that. It takes a depth of maturity. And so I've really began to kind of, in those conversations along those lines, pressed hard to say, have you worked out how this would play out in your life? And are you willing to go for the ride that kind of that collision of world creates? It's that Seinfeld episode, it's my two worlds are colliding. So, yeah.
Good. So what are some of the dangers or pitfalls? You just mentioned one in particular.
Yeah.
What are some of those dangers or pitfalls of vocational ministry?
Yeah, I've written this out, and we may post this on a blog post so you can read through it in more detail. I don't want to go into all of them in depth because I've walked through kind of the dangers and pitfalls of them, and then what can we do to safeguard ourselves from them. So let me give them to you quickly. And again, there's some more depth and insight to each of these that we've worked through over the last bunch of years. But the first would be complacency. And I feel like complacency seems like one of those ugly words that none of us would kind of on the outside want to admit. But I think it's a real danger for vocational ministry. It's the other side of the coin of serving in a growing, thriving church where we're seeing the hand of God at work. So I referenced Luke chapter 9. This is right before kind of the transfiguration. Jesus invites these disciples to come with him up onto the mountain. And I was struck by just the fact that for them, this was every day. If I'm sitting at home, doing nothing, which doesn't happen all that often with kids, but I'm sitting at home and Jesus knocks on my door and says, hey, you want to go for a walk? Like, I am fully alert, I'm paying attention, I'm rearing to go, can't believe that the Lord Jesus has asked me to go with him on this. And it says in Luke chapter 9 that they were sleepy. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. And it just struck me that there was a level of complacency. Now, maybe there was also a level of just exhaustion because they've been working hard and serving in ministry, but it's hard for me to not think about how interesting in this very unique moment where they were few witnesses to this incredible event that they were sleepy. And it reminded me that is a danger for us on a team as well, where we can get into a place where thousands of people are coming to hear the word on a weekly basis, and that just seems normal to us. Or tons of people throughout the course of a year are responding through a decision to follow Christ, or through believers' baptism, or through diving into community. And that just seems normal to us, And I think it's important for us to stop when we find ourselves in a vocational ministry context like this, and just thank God for that, and be overwhelmed with the opportunity to be a part of that. I think complacency is a danger, and I think we need to be careful to combat that actively and repeatedly through thankfulness.
Right.
So, second one is what I call bubble living. And I think bubble living is really just, it's a funny phrase maybe, but it's this idea that kind of everything happens inside the same sphere. Like I was saying earlier, my friends, my coworkers, my church friends, people that are in my small group, all of that kind of lives in this bubble. And really where maybe if you're serving or working in an industry, you have repeated opportunities to interact with coworkers who are not believers. How do I not find myself just living in this bubble, operating in the microcosm that is church culture, and forgetting that I have neighbors to the left and right of me who are lost? I don't get to scrimmage with the world in some of those conversations. Maybe the sharpness of my ability to share the gospel, to be evangelistic, doesn't play out in my life. And so the safeguard for that is go find those opportunities. Really pray and think about where are some places and ways that I can actively interact with those that are lost, those that are not believers. Because if not, we just find ourselves going through an entire 7-week period, and I may never see anybody outside my own bubble. So bubble living is one. The next is what I call stunting of personal growth. And what I just said is busy schedules serve as a perfect catalyst to draw attention from our daily walk with Christ and sets the table for spiritual stunting. I think it's this idea that, well, man, I'm around the things of God all the time. We get to sit and hear, how many people outside of our staff team, the answer is 0, get to sit in a staff lunch and hear Pastor Jerry talk to us about things he's been reading in his Bible throughout the week. That's a privilege for us, right? But it can sometimes replace, if we're not careful, our own desire to grow and to dig in and to think and to learn with other believers. And so we have to be careful that we don't allow the vocational side of what we do replace the personal walking with Christ. Again, I'll walk through these kind of quickly. The next is burnout. The reality is, and I want to be careful, for those of us who have an opportunity to kind of lead and set schedules for employees and think through these things, one, I would never want to say that we are apologetic for the busyness of ministry activity. There's a lot to get done, and the reality is that whole work-life balance thing just looks different here. But we want to be careful to pay attention that people don't just get burned out, myself included, because there's just so much to do. And what I've said is that God card, well, this is for the Lord. Well, this is for Jesus. So we can just do more. We can push harder. But God doesn't call us to neglect our families. God doesn't call us to neglect the other relationships He's placed in our lives. And so we want to be careful that we don't let burnout take place in our life. And again, the way we can combat that is really just rest. Having good rhythms of rest. Doesn't always look like I get my nap at the end of the day. Don't always look like I get my day off as scheduled every single time and nothing will interrupt it. We can safeguard ourselves in some ways, but it does mean that I have rhythms of rest. And actually, that's something that I've talked in some of our other contexts about, the idea that these are these rhythms of graceful rest that we find in our lives. Maybe that looks like a personal retreat that you take once a year or a couple times a year. Maybe it looks like setting aside early hours in the morning so that you personally get refreshed. I know Dave Drake's talked to our team about bringing home our best. I think that's such a great principle. And again, those things will help us to not just go through the daily grind and find ourselves super burned out at the end of the day. And then the last one is what I just call pride and entitlement. And again, that goes back to this idea that somehow vocational ministry is this thing that we can claim to say, well, I work for a church, so I'm more spiritual than you. I'm in ministry, and somehow that makes me. I think we want to be careful to remember that we are servants, and to be careful to remember that our job, both to each other on our staff team, and to those in our congregation, and to those in the community, is to take the humble posture, to be a servant. And again, we can combat that entitlement by humbling ourselves and praying and reminding ourselves before God of who we are and how grateful we should be to serve in this place. So those are the 5 what I call dangers of vocational ministry. So.
Got it. Good. Thanks for sharing that. Anything else that you wanted to talk about on this topic?
Just that I am grateful, and I know you are as well. My story is not normal, I've been serving here for a super long time. People hear that number, 18 years, they're like, man, what? Because they don't really believe I'm over 25, I guess is I don't know. I do have 3 kids and 1 on the way, by the way. But man, God has been so good to me, and even the idea of what vocational ministry looks like, I'm super thankful for that. Others on our team I know are newly joining onto the staff team, and the idea of working for a church is new. I just want you to maybe pause and think about the ability to be grateful, the ability to express gratitude and thanks, and also to realize that this is an incredible and unique calling that we have in this place at this time. And we're getting to see God work in some cool ways. So I guess I would just say practicing thankfulness and gratitude is a great way to be reminded of what vocational ministry should look like in my life. So.
Great thoughts, great advice. Appreciate it, John.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks.